Hello, friends. I'd like to welcome you to the InterlifeX Job Search Advice Community, a community that's dedicated to providing you, yes, you, dear community member, with easy to understand takeaways that you can apply to make your job search experience less anxiety driven, less confusing, but more enjoyable. Today, I'm really excited to be having a great friend of mine. I'm actually calling my brother, Philip. He's going to be helping us with the topic of how to interview smarter. Philip, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Rodney. Thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure. So, Philip, you have over 8 years of experience within the management consulting space, and you're currently managing the engineering division at Mazars Financial Services Africa. And something that's also quite outstanding when I look at the experience that you have is you've engaged with corporates from different sectors. So through your 8 years, you've worked with corporates from the automotive sector, the telecommunications sector, the mining, banking and insurance, the education, and the manufacturing sector. And currently, you've also been engaged with interviews from, if I remember correctly, you mentioned two categories of of individuals. One being the individuals who are actually wanting to work for Mazars within the engineering division, as well as the companies that come and want to partner up with Mazars from a supply chain perspective. So
Yeah,
I think firstly, I just want to say we are really happy to have you on this podcast, Philip. Thank you so much for taking your time. And how's it going that side? How's your day coming along?
it's busy at the moment, and we never complain about that, right? But it's really a pleasure to be here. It's important that you make time for these things because people are the drumbeat of your business. If you don't have people, if you don't have good people, you don't have a business at all. So we take our recruitment process and we take it very, very seriously because we consider it as a strategic lever to the success of our organization to make sure that we have the right candidates for the job, because ultimately they are the people, especially in the consulting space, that who represent me on the ground. Um, so far more than any sort of senior individual I have in my team that might have discussions at Exco or whatever corporate. Um, it's the individuals on the ground that have everyday discussions with the clients on the ground that drive this thing forward, because company leaders listen to the people lower down, and it's the impression that they get at that ground level that often makes them return to us and say, my employees had a great experience working with you guys. Could you come and do something else for me? So to me, that's why we focus so heavily on the type of people that we hire, and that we've spent quite a lot of time over the last 2 years maturing our, let's say, recruitment model and defining what it is in a candidate that we want, and defining our own culture in terms of who
Mm,
we are and what that means in the industry.
absolutely. I'm just thinking of a quote here that Richard Branson mentioned. He said that an organization is as valuable by the quality of people that it has. And it says that the people is the most important asset that any organization can have. So, Philip, our podcasters, those that are listening to this podcast, some of them come from various situational backgrounds. Some people are either unemployed at the current moment. Some of them are actually students who are looking to start getting employed in the next coming months or so, and we just wanted to use this time to say, hey, before you go to an interview, right, we need to make sure that you're properly prepared to actually have a successful interview. And that at the same time, we also want our listeners to also bear in mind that you've mentioned something that I find very profound, is that when you're joining a company, you're joining a community. And the purpose of of an interview is to make sure that you are going to fit in with that community, because those interactions, they also contribute to how effective you work as an individual. So I think that it's just important that we highlight that Our goal is not only just to give you how to have a good interview, but also how to have a good interview and also be finding the company that you're aligned with, where you can actually join the community. So people usually remember things that when you tell them these are the top mistakes you should try to avoid, right? And when you just try to reflect on the interviews that you've had, right, with the two categories, what are the things that you're usually looking for as an employer?
So I'll start off with the people that I'm recruiting for my own full-time employment, right? So the first thing that we do when we start off that interview is we introduce ourselves, right? And Rodney's laid out my credentials quite nicely at the start of this. So we're quite deliberate in that. So I'll bring in myself, and then I'll bring in somebody who's even more senior and who's more impressive than me. And it's a bit of a mind game. So we try and intimidate the candidates a little bit. And if you fall for that trap, you lose confidence. And that leads to the first sort of mistake, is that if you're not confident, and it's unfortunately, if you're interviewing for your first job, it's nerve-wracking, right? And we're very, very aware of that. But if you can hold your ground, if you can stay steadfast, it's a good show. It means that you've got enough confidence in your own abilities to be able to talk articulately with somebody who's listening very attentively to what you have to say. Because the interview is actually all about you. Is we really, really have made, the half an hour or 45 minutes that we've scheduled with you, we've made that time to listen to you. And you have the floor for the most part, right? So you need to own that space. And if you're not at your best, it's better to reschedule the meeting. I'd rather reschedule the meeting and give you the opportunity to be at your best than if you'd sort of rushed into it to try and get it done and you're not at your best, and I don't see your full value as an employee. That's
Maybe whilst you're on that one, Philip, you mentioned something about seeing people being nervous when they walk in. If you just think about some of the interviews that you've had with the candidates, what portion of the candidates that actually come into the interview room have you seen having some sense of nervousness coming from them from the moment you meet them? Is it something that's very common among the candidates?
So among your first years, absolutely. It's around 60 to 80% of the candidates that you interview initially are a little bit nerve-wracked. And it's not just that you stutter or that you don't know what to say, it's that the way that you articulate yourself around a point tends to run in circles, and you're not speaking in a logical, thought out method that says, here's the beginning, here's my argument, and sort of that's the conclusion to what I'm saying. And you sort of trail off and get distracted by what you've just said, and then sort of, oh yes, I actually meant to speak about that, as you do. But in the context of an interview, that becomes very dangerous.
And I want to ask a follow-up question on that one, Philip. If you're interviewing someone, right, and they have a sense of nervousness before maybe a senior executive at your company, when they get the job and they in your case, in your scenario, and they start consulting at a client and they're meeting an executive, do they have that same nervousness that they had before the interview when they're meeting that executive for the first time?
So I would expect them to, yes, but I generally don't hire the guys that are too nervous. That being said, it's not like I haven't hired somebody who hasn't had extremely high technical ability despite the initial nervousness in the interview. So if you excel in other areas, I might still give you a chance. But what we'll do then is we'll take on the responsibility of coaching you to get you to a emotionally prepared state that you can do that. Because what you're referring to here, Rodney, is that whenever I have an interview in the field, right, that employee is representative of my business on the ground. So if you're a nervous wreck in front of an executive, like that's their impression of my business. And I don't want that. So I'd like you to be at your best in front of, especially in front of senior stakeholders, but in front, so much more meaningful giving somebody who's 50%, 60%, 70% of the way there, that coaching to get them across the line to be at 100% than trying to get somebody who's at 20, 30, 40% to 100%. Like it's a much smaller gap I need to close. And if you have those foundational skills, it just helps so much. Just by the way, it's not about being an introvert or an extrovert, right? So I'm introverted myself, and we hire primarily industrial engineers, and most engineers are introverts. But despite that quality, you can still have a measure of calm in how you conduct yourself. And it's just about being level-headed and calm when you start relaying information. It's not about necessarily knowing what to talk about, when you're in an elevator.
Yes. So one thing I'm noticing there is be able to engage with people. It's a skill that when you're thinking about a university graduate, they're not really taught the skill. A lot of times you don't really practice engaging with stakeholders, people from businesses, having that continuous conversation. And I think that it's a skill that I'm actually learning from you is let it be a part of your life, being able to communicate with people regardless of what the circumstance is.
Absolutely, right. So I tell all my employees that our business is built purely on networking, but what's even more true is that your entire career will be built on your ability to network. So I can tell a very short story here. Is
Sure,
that
yeah.
The way I got into my current position at Mazars is through networking. So when I was working at Deloitte in my second year of employment, this is way back in 2018, I was sitting in a corridor, and I was documenting a business process. And my now boss, my now director, was walking in the aisle, and he saw me doing this document, and he sort of caught a glimpse of the diagram that I was busy with, and we started chatting about it, and we formed a connection, right? He and I just got off like nobody's business right from the beginning, and we had human discussions, and it's on the basis of those very human discussions that weren't even related to work, right? It wasn't even related to what Deloitte was doing or how fantastically they're performing or any of those things. It was just him and I connecting on a human level. And on the basis of that, he called me up, one day I was working at a very large mining firm, and I was hating my life at the moment. So he called me out of the blue, and he's like, "Philip, we're building a business, and I'd like you to come build with me." And I immediately said yes. And it took a couple of months before I could make the move and join him in my current capacity. But the opportunity that I had was based off of my relationship with him. So having that ability to talk to people and network with them and relate with them is critical, right? And the same applies to my clients, right? So I've got a lot of people that just the way that we think, the way that we unpack problems, and our ability to articulate those things, people relate to those things. And like, Philip, you'll be seeing us again. I've had 2 people that left the company that they were working at, and then they've said, we're going to bring you in at our next company. Don't worry, it's coming, right? So like I sell work on the basis of my ability to relate to people and to form, professional friendships or professional relationships.
Wow. And it's a social dynamic that in the sense that we as human beings, we're designed to want to interact or work with those that are human, right? And in order to be human, you need to be willing to go out of your bubble and just from a normal human perspective, because you mentioned that you was not speaking about the job when he saw you with that map, but you were just speaking about human things. And a lot of people tend to shy away from having human conversations when they see at networking event big executives. You know, they
Yeah.
try to over impress by giving these academic terminologies to thinking that, hey, if I use these complex terms, I'm gonna be regarded as someone that is most suitable for any vacancy that can come. But the basic is just be human, learn to interact with anybody
Mm.
from a human level. And when you go to the interview, because you're used to interacting with people from a human level, you will tend to be less nervous
Yes, that's very true.
because the
I
person
agree with
before
that.
you is a human being as well.
You can never forget that, right? So at the end of the day, like we're all just human beings. I can state that somewhat differently, but the point is exactly that. And at a very fundamental level, no matter how intelligent the person on the other end of that call is, right, or how impressive they are, they're still just people. So when, for instance, we go and re-engineer academic institutes, and you're working with people with 2 to 3, PhDs behind their name, like these are people with IQs way above mine, but just by being relatable to them, we form a friendship, right? And I use that word softly. It's always in a professional context, but you form a human relationship with them, and that based off of that, you can phone them up and say, listen, I've got a problem with the project. We need to get unstuck, or can you help me sort this thing out, or whatever. And it just makes life so much easier when you have that type of thing, because you buy goodwill by having human relationships.
And I'm just thinking for our, especially students who are about to graduate, you're trained so much to focus on your studies and stick in your room, and you only speak with those within your networks, right?
Yeah.
So life is go to the lecture rooms, study in the library, and that's pretty much 3 to 4 years of your life. And you spend less time interacting with executives or networking. And so it's no surprise to me that when you're a student who's about to graduate and you have to go speak to an executive, in your mind you're shocked, like, I'm speaking to an executive. Well, the best way to interview is to actually practice doing this and let it become a part of your habit, because it's a conversation. I believe it's a conversation. It's like you're having a casual conversation with someone trying to know you, to say, hey, are you going to be a fit? And a lot of people don't think of that. So yeah, Philip, so you've mentioned the aspect of owning the
Confidence.
ground, owning the ground as the first one. What are the tips of the mistakes that people should avoid in the interview that you'd like to share?
So I think we've spoken about having confidence as the first one, right? So the second mistake I'll list is that people don't own the space they're given, right? So if I ask you a question, you're inclined to answer immediately, or want to answer immediately. It's especially in either a very technical question where I need you to solve a problem, or in a very open-ended question where, by the way, you also need to solve a problem. The intention is that that you first buy yourself a moment of time. So you can very directly ask and say, give me a moment to think about that, right? And in doing so, you buy yourself about 45 seconds, right? Where people will be very comfortable just sitting in silence to let you think before you come up with an answer. And once you've formulated your answer, you can start relaying that back. So own that space and don't be shy of doing so. If you have a very, let's say, impatient interviewer, and he starts nudging you, you can just say, I'm still thinking, and he'll need to give you the moment. So own it, right? It's fine. if the guy doesn't do that, I'd probably not want to work for him. So let's state that quite directly, right? Because it's in the professional environment, you're going to be needing to solve real problems as well, right? And in that context, you also need to own the space and take the time you need to solve the problems. And yes, there's a deadline, right? Yes, there's an end to the meeting, by which point you would have had to give a very good answer. But don't, if the interview overruns and we really want to hear more of what you had to say, if your answer was good enough to say, I want to have a follow-up, I'll schedule a follow-up, don't worry.
Okay.
I'll schedule that follow-up. But then your answer should have been good enough to warrant that. And the only way you're going to get to an answer that's at that level is either have the experience that gives you a foundation to answer from quite broadly, quite quickly, or think through the problem that you're solving well enough to be able to answer at that level.
Absolutely. I'm just realizing here that when people are in an interview, at times they're so, should I say, they're so concerned about the outcome that they end up shutting down the ability to actually think through some of their responses. And that's why you get people who, after the interview, they're like, wait, why did I give that answer? That was so off topic. But I appreciate when you mentioned the aspect of it's okay to be human and say, hey, can you just give me a few seconds just to think about this so that the response I'm giving you is what's coming from the depth of my heart. It's not coming out of the pressure of wanting to give you a response. It's coming of me processing. And I think that also benefits you within the client environment. Is this what you also apply, where when you're engaging with the stakeholders, is a customer willing for you to say, wait, just give me a few seconds to think about this?
So let's put that in context, right? So in the context of a professional career, you have a deliverable, right? So I need to hand over some sort of business artifact, a document or something at the end of that period. If you come back and say, I need more time to polish this, then yes. Ideally, you'd like to say, here's the draft of what I'm working on. In the outside of the interview context, you'd say, here's the draft of what I'm working on, but I still need to polish areas X, Y, Z. So the intention there is to show progress, and then follow up with with what you've considered as final. There's an even better way of doing that, so that you're proactive. But in the context of an interview, you're automatically on the back foot because you need to wait for me to ask a question before you can sort of come up with a response. So yeah, I suppose giving yourself that room is important, both in the context of you being employed and you not being employed, right? And we can always say that to the other side of people that we recruit as well, where it's in the context of business partnerships. So in the context of business partnerships, I'm recruiting somebody for a technical ability that doesn't fall within my core capabilities. And in that context, I very often test them for their own competence in what I'm supposedly, looking to partner with them on. So be that something as simple as somebody who does web design, or somebody who does machine learning as part of their business, whatever the case might be. We'll ask them, can you give me practical examples of what you've done? And it's my job to make sure that I have a solid enough understanding of what I'm asking them to partner with me on, that I can actually meaningfully partner with them, and that we're on equal ground, and that I can ask a question that's deeply technical enough that they need to give me a very, I suppose, in-depth answer on, and that's not just a generalized, fluffy, consulting answer that pulls the wool over somebody's eyes. Especially if you're intending on spending money together, you want to cover your bases. So I suppose fundamentally in an interview, that's what the interview is also doing. Is like, I'm going to invest in this person. Am I going to get value for my money? Right. That's what an interview is trying to answer. But absolutely. All right.
So thinking of be yourself. Let the answer that you give be the answer that's coming from the depths of within. So that's why you need to take time to think and
Yeah.
actually process through what you're going to say. Don't give the interviewer the answer that you think they want to hear. Be yourself.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you're going to be joining a community, and if you're not yourself, and then you're going to be acting against your values when you're in that community, and then you're going to find yourself being frustrated because the moment you act against your values, you don't have a level of satisfaction in the setting that you are in. So in other words, you're actually protecting this interview, the person being interviewed, by asking them these questions, because you're trying to find out, hey, will you be satisfied with this role? And a lot of people don't think about it that way. so so you've covered the how to respond to questions about taking time. What other mistake should people avoid?
The last mistake that people should avoid is to not listen. So the what I mean by that is when I ask an open-ended question, people see that at face value when it's not at face value question. Questions such as "Tell me about yourself," questions such as "What is your worldview?" is one of our favorites. And "What is your worst quality?" These aren't questions meant to try and break you down as an individual, to make you look absolutely critically at yourself. In fact, it's your resilience to that question that I'm testing, and your ability to solve that problem and say, okay, this person's asking me a very uncomfortable question. Firstly, let me frame that question so that I can give a context within which I'm comfortable answering, right? So you need to define the borders of your answer, and then you can color in within the lines of what you've discussed. So those are open-ended questions, and you don't need to give a single line answer. You can give a paragraph answer. You can give a essay answer if you really must. But allow yourself the freedom to give a well thought out answer. So going back to point number 2. And in doing so, you display having an element of gravitas, which I suppose is a bonus tip I'll throw into this, is if you display that confidence we spoke out in point 1, and you give yourself the space, which we spoke about number 2, and you listen, you come across as being somebody who's knowledgeable and somebody who's professional, and that carries a certain weight in the meeting, and I'd be inclined to listen to somebody who does that. And that's also the type of individual who's not going to disappear into the into the noise in the background of whatever context I put them into. They're going to stand up straight and have their presence known and be listened to in a client context. So when I interview for people, that's something that we look for. And yeah, that's something that we deliberately look for, and obviously we apply our own flavor to that. So there's a type of individual that we're looking for from a competence or a team's perspective, and their specific outlook and certain abilities or whatever that we look for specifically. But if you generalize this to any employment role, it's if you have those things down, whatever you're requested for, you're interviewing for, at the human level, you'll ace it. And then the only thing that remains is that you have the technical knowledge that they require of the role. And I assume that you wouldn't be applying to a job that you don't have that technical knowledge for. So you'd already be equipped to articulate that technical knowledge as thoroughly as you can, and as well as you possibly can.
So are you looking more for a systemic response? I'm just thinking here about generally people are trained on how to solve a problem, right? You need to understand the problem. After you've identified the problem, then you need to come up with what are the goals that you're trying to achieve by solving these problems? What are the steps that you're kind of taking to reach to that goal? Do you appreciate more someone who gives you a structured response
Yes.
to that question, or someone who just mixes up
No. So
responses?
having a structured response is always preferable to somebody who's erratic.
Okay.
And Rodney knows me very well, right? I can be like the most erratic person under the sun. But
Absolutely.
when you're in a client's environment and you're working in client things, you need to be systematic, or you won't finish your projects on time. You won't get very far, and you won't be able to articulate what you want to achieve in the context of work. So being systemic is critical in an interview, because it shows that skill. The way that I think and the way that I articulate myself, if I can do that systemically, then I can work systemically, and I can manage a project systemically. So it's a critical skill.
It's a critical skill, and people might think it's complex, but I actually don't think it's complex. It's sort of like thinking about using a spanner. If you think of a shifting spanner, for those of you who've worked with mechanics, you can use it on a bicycle, you can use it on a wheelbarrow, you can use it on an airplane. The thing is, you just need to master how to use the spanner. Whether you're given to work on a car, you just go on where there's the nut and bolt and you just use it. So whether you have a different kind of problem, you still have a spanner. If that approach that you use of articulating yourself is structured, you don't it's not complex. It's just having a structured approach that you follow in giving responses and answering questions. And I think that you don't learn a lot of this in university.
No, you don't, and it's unfortunate. So I suppose if I were to break it down as a recipe, is I'd always start playing back to ensure that I understand the question that's being asked. Right? So I'd almost repeat the question back in slightly different words, to make sure that the thing that I'm answering is indeed what is being asked. And then I'll frame a response and say, okay, so my worldview in the context of my professional career has more to do with my vocation and how I see my purpose in life. And then I'll answer, then I've created a context that I can answer in meaningfully, rather than just say I'm a generally positive person and I try and look for the best in people and that sort of thing, which is it's not a bad answer, and it does tell me something about you, which is useful to me as somebody who's evaluating a culture fit. And I think that's something we'll speak about next. But it's not necessarily, and in most cases, it's not what your interviewer is looking for. So framing, and I think that's one of my biggest tips, is when you get open-ended questions, is frame your answer clearly, and then then fill in the gaps.
To frame your answer clearly, and in order to frame your answer, you need some form of a framework, and to simplify it, you need just a structured approach on how you give answers. Is there any last tip or word of encouragement that you'd like to give to our job seekers who are going to be listening to this podcast?
Yeah, so it's always be sensitive to the culture of the company that you're working for, or that you're going to work for, right? So a job interview is a two-way street. It's this, when you're a first-time job seeker, many people in the unfortunate position that they pressed, right? They almost desperate to get that first job, so they accept the first thing that they get, and a lot of people end up in unfortunate positions because they weren't, in their mind, they weren't in a position to accept something different. But use any interview that you're participating in as a practice session, right? So use your interviewers as people to practice interviewing with, because if you go through all the bad ones, the people that you don't want to use, that you don't want to work for, and let them hone your skills as an interviewee, and you get to the job that you really want, you can interview well, right? And it's a two-way game, right? So we're happy to decline 90% of the people that we interview, but you should also be happy to decline a bunch of the people that you interview as somebody sitting on the other side of the table. And financially, I know it's not always feasible to do that, or that you have a limited capacity of, your money's going to run out in 3 months and then you need a salary. So there are constraints to that, and I accept that. But by and large, try and get practice in, and be sensitive to the culture of the company that you're interviewing. So there's a culture framework that I apply, that I sort of use when I think about how culture works in a company. So you'd have an internal and external element in terms of how do they engage with their employees and how do they engage with their customers as internal and internal. And then on at the top of bottom, you've got your personality and your vocation. So what is what is their purpose, right? And then the top of that, you've got the capability and qualification. So what are the hard skills that they go and apply? And you start quadrant by quadrant and you analyze, well, how do they play in each of those quadrants? So internally in their skills, how do they work internally in their teams, and how do they articulate what is the type of dynamic between people in their teams? That's sort of internal teams. And then you go to sort of internal to the customer side, which is actually internal to the community, is how does this business play in the larger community? How does this business interact with its customers? How does it network with its customers? How does it sell itself and position itself in the market? Then you've got your external technical skills, which is just what does this company do, right? And then at top right is what are the things that this company does to improve on itself? Because you need to hone those technical skills in your team before you can take them to market, unless you work in marketing, which you sell shit out of it before you before you've even built it. But let's not go there. But if you've filled in all of those quadrants and you have an idea of how the company works, you know exactly who that company is. You know what that company's identity is. And you should always ask back the questions: is how do you interact with people in the team? So how does management work? What type of manager are you? Are you going to be managing me, right? So what is the management style? You don't want to have somebody, especially early in your career, that's going to say, I'm going to give you a very specific set of tasks and I want you to execute them, and we're going to make sure that those tasks are at the right quality, because what you're reading between the lines there is there's a micromanager.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be micromanaged as your first job. You'd like it's far better that you get somebody who's going to let you make mistakes and give you room to grow and explore and contribute things. As I mean, Rodney's catering this to industrial engineers, like you guys are bright, like fucking hell, you guys knock my socks off every day. So it's in a business's interest to be willing to listen to the lower down employees, and you want to be able to test this. Is that company going to listen to its employee, to the people that it hires? Do you have that opportunity to bring new ideas in, or is it 40-year-old people that brought in things from the 1980s?
No innovation at all.
There's no innovation, right? Or are they testing? So you can ask questions like, how are you improving in your capabilities? How are you doing differently tomorrow what you did yesterday?
Sure.
So that you know that there's what type of culture they have to the capabilities and to the things that they do. If it's just the same thing that they're applying over and over and over and over at different clients, there's no growth, and you're going to learn that skill, and within, I promise you, 8 months you're going to be bored.
Wow.
So that's that's it for me in a nutshell. Like, no, I'm obviously very subjective in this as to what my preference would be for a company and how I look at companies and how I evaluate companies. But I think it's a pretty solid framework, and I've seen companies not do this, and I've seen them fail too.
Definitely. And I really truly believe, Philip, that from the people who are going to be watching this podcast, what they can take away from this is simple to understand tips that you can follow. Because a lot of the times you find you need to get interview advice, right? And you get this when you just search on the internet. It gives you these structured responses to give. It says, when you're asked this question, respond this way. But what I really admired about the approach that you're giving is you're giving us the tools that, no, this is what you need. You need to be able to give a structured answer. All right. So what I now know is I don't need to copy and paste the responses that the internet has. I need to have an understanding of how to give structured answers. So we really enjoyed having you today, Philip, and We really, really appreciate these easy to understand takeaways, and we truly believe that they are going to help the individuals who are watching this podcast within their job search experience. And we want to turn it from being anxiety driven, but to be an enjoyable experience. So, Philip, how can people get hold of you if anyone wants to reach out to you?
I'm available as Philip Deploy on LinkedIn. You can also find me on the Mazars website. I think I'm registered as one of the contact people under Mazars Financial Services Engineering and robotics process automation, intelligent automation at some of those sites. Yeah, I think those are the primary ways in which you can get a hold of me.
Awesome. Philip, like I say, you're my brother. It's been an awesome journey. Thank you so much for your time.
Likewise to you, Rodney. All the best. Cheers, man. Bye.
Yes. Bye bye.